Welcome again, Zita Cobb, Gillick, Facing Neoliberalism. Is contemporary art neoliberalism in its purest form? Consider the art context as perfect mirror of rampant neoliberal capitalism, containing no resources to counter the complete reach of a marketization of every relationship. My voice. This is a very emotional topic for me. So it's also very strange to see you both on stage. I have a working relationship to Liam, and a friendship, working relationship since many, many years. And I work for Zita Cobb for her project on Vogel Island. And yes, it's very important for me to have you both here. Consider the art context as perfect mirror of rampant neoliberal capitalism, containing no resources to counter the complete reach of a marketing of every relationship. And this is pitched against an intense insistence on refusal. Artists always refuse, or they think they do. Refusal and resistance. Is contemporary art a site of exploitation? Artists are often considered to think differently than other thinkers, and isn't this flavor of other thinking such that mixes the pseudo-academic thinking? And this kind of thinking can often be a context of exactly what neoliberalism would like to extract from these cultural producers. Can the cultural producer, creative worker, actually play any role in power relations? And what of capital as a marker for civic and cultural value in art? And then what ethical footwork is needed to navigate this for a cultural producer or for a cultural consumer? And isn't contemporary art already rife with a series of psycho-ethical competitions, of instrumentalized justifications? This is also the conflict I'm working in, or we are working in here every day. Following a very successful career in the high technology industry, Zita Cobb returned to Vogel Island, her birthplace, and founded the Shorefast Foundation, a private foundation that seeks to use art and culture under the aspect of sustainability, open up new perspectives to the Canadian island of Vogel in Newfoundland. Until the 1970s, these remote islands lived from fishing before the cod stocks were almost wiped out by large-scale industrial fishing, and large sections of the population moved to the mainland, or got moved to the mainland. Through a scholarship program and various artist studios, and now the newly opened Vogel Island Inn, the foundation today networks international artists during their stays with the local population. Film projects involving the inhabitants of Vogel Island, or cooperation between product designers and indigenous craftspeople, represent an agenda that has itself the aim on halting the immigration from the island, and also of opening a sustainable sources of income. One of the goals of the foundation is to create jobs. The newly founded and opened Vogel Island Inn will be fully operated by a staff of 90 Vogel Island residents, and the profits from the inn are directly reinvested into the community. Based in London and New York, Liam Gillick has been exhibiting internationally since the beginning of the 1990s. His ongoing interest in the legacy of modernism has resulted in a truly remarkable and influential body of work and a practice that has developed and extended into many disciplines, acting as sculpture, architect, designer, critic, author, and curator. Recently, he was selected the 38th Brampton Series Speaker. The Brampton Lectures in America are a series of biennial lectures given by prominent scholars in the field of theology, science, art, and medicine. And he presented a series of 4 lectures looking at a particular genealogy of the modern period that offers a revised understanding of the origins of contemporary art and its analysis. Similar, his more recent polemic essays on work, abstractions, and the contemporary have looked at the effects that these moments have had on contemporary art, proposing a new way to approach the subjective and documentarian strands of recent work. Yeah, welcome both.
Thank you. Some of what Nicolaus said is true, but he didn't explain that he's quite good at creating a firewall between his colleagues sometimes. This is one of the actually very interesting and fascinating aspects of his working life. So Zita and I have never met before. We met yesterday. But we exist in this parallel relationship to the Nicolaus and his role, his new role here. And in a way, we've been forced together and forced to address an area which, in a way, we're both as much embedded in it as a system and caught within it, as much as we try to be aware of it and offer, maybe naively, some moments or models of resistance. We just do it in a different way. We had some conversations, and it was decided that I would say a few things first, right? Then Zita's going to show some images and ideas of the history and the structures, the social and political and cultural structures that she's involved in. And I'm going to try and interrupt her sometimes when I don't understand something. And then we will try to continue a conversation which can maybe open out. So first, a couple of thoughts on this subject. Some of the words that Nicolaus read in this little introduction, I wrote them. Or fragments of it come from a text that I wrote. And in fact, what they were saying was, they were concerned towards the idea of these ideas being an accusation towards artists. It wasn't something that I was necessarily expressing as a definition of the way things are. I was suggesting that these were the accusations that intelligent, thoughtful, politically conscious, sophisticated people could reasonably say to an artist now about their situation. And I then would proceed in a text I wrote a couple of years ago called The Good of Work to try and resist or explain a kind of resistance to this, or at least do it theoretically, if not in reality. One of the reasons, so what I want to do is just take you back a little bit, just quickly, to the early and mid-90s, when I think what happened was certain groups of artists felt that it might be possible to play with ideas of community, sociability, work, kind of the process of work and production within the sites of art, the traditional sites of the gallery and the museum and the institution, as a kind of extension and continuation of institutional critique on one hand, but also as an actual model, like modeling new ways to produce and new ways to exist. Now, that happened to coincide with the emergence of the contemporary curator as we understand them now. And for a while, there was a kind of confluence or a coming together of interests between some artists and some curators about how they could animate and make new models of communities within the spaces of art. I think we're all aware that this caused as many problems as it caused potentials, and became institutionalized and got its own kind of predictable, formalistic techniques and methods just like anything else. But something's still there, something resonated, something still hasn't been completely finished with. One thing that I've noticed is what has happened is that the idea of the space for art has changed. It's shifted a little bit. There's been a growth and a rise in the idea of the residency as a specifically designed environment that often takes place in a very specific sort of, I don't know what you call it, like a social ecology or something, like a very specific location. And for me, that's what Fogo seems to be. So maybe at that point, I'm curious about how this, whether this is the legacy of that 90s thinking in a new form, or whether this is something new. So maybe you could start talking, showing some of the images, and we can take it from there.
Okay, Martin is going to put up. Okay, so I should start by saying that I'm probably the only person in this room, fair to say, that comes from people who don't read or write. And that's important because I'm 8th generation Fogo Islander, and when I finished high school there and went away to the mainland, or went up to Canada, as we say.
Who can't read and write?
My parents. I can. I'm the first generation that can, from all the people that I come from. And so I've always been very preoccupied with ways of knowing. And coming to the mainland into a society that everybody could read and write, and coming into collision with people who assumed that that was the only way to know things. So I'm really interested in how we know things. And so maybe I'll say in response to what Liam was saying at the outset here, when we started the project at home, my brothers and I was absolutely deeply committed to the idea we should find some way to have a meaningful presence of artists on the island, because it just seemed to me, and I'm a business person, I came out of a finance background, that it was a way of knowing that we didn't have, and a way of knowing that might serve us well as the world was skyrocketing past us, and really all we knew was fish.
But is that because I don't understand completely where you get from? Is it to do with the acceleration of education you're talking about? So you're moving very rapidly from not reading and writing to all of a sudden people sitting around with a stick,
right? And so and now my generation and younger obviously are all educated and are connected in all of that. But there's a purity of knowledge there in these people that comes from the natural world, the people of the island.
On Fogo Island.
Yes, and they know things from first principles, and they think from first principles. And so what I found really interesting, or what I found appealing about the idea of let's have a residency program, let's find a way for artists to live in the community with us, it just seemed to be another way of knowing from first principles. And therefore I trusted it more because of its source, and that's why I wanted to start with that. So just to give you that background. Okay, this word about wicked problems is going to come up again. So just to give you context, Fogo Island is off the northeast coast of Newfoundland, and I should say that Newfoundland joined Canada in 1949. When I left home to go to university in 1975, people still said, "Oh, you're going up to Canada." So it's really very much a world apart.
So when you left the island, you were going to Canada?
I was going to Canada to go to university. And of course, Canada, as I'm sure everybody knows, is very much a place that's had a very strong, overarching social vision We pay lots and lots of taxes, and we're happy to do it. It's fiscally conservative and socially liberal. It's been the history of the country. But there we are out in the North Atlantic. So Fogo Island happens to be one of the four corners of a flat Earth, which I love the idea of. It seems like a really good place to have a debate. So on Fogo Island, everything has been for 400 years that my ancestors have lived there. People lived there before, but that's a whole other conversation. Has been about fish, in particular this fish, the codfish. And there it is. We were a dominion since we became a dominion in 1907. And we had our own currency, of course. And what would you put on the currency?
What do you understand? What's a dominion? Sorry.
Well, we were a country, basically.
A country.
We were a country. We had our own parliament.
Independent country.
An independent country from 1907.
Okay.
And in the 30s, we struggled during the Depression, and eventually, that's another whole story about how we joined Canada. But there
so
you
is
go.
that King someone?
Yes,
that's
I
from
think
the 30s.
It looks like George or someone. I'm not sure. Yes, that was 1937, so that would have been.
So after being independent, it became a colony?
We became a colony again after we got rescued, and then joined Canada. So this is, I love quoting Wikipedia, but there it is. It sets up, I think the talk that Liam and I are supposed to be having has a title, and I think it's Facing Neoliberalism. So there you go. When we joined Canada, we relinquished control of the fisheries to Ottawa. It was the capital of Canada. Of course, people in Ottawa don't know much about fish, and honestly don't care much about fish. I want to try and talk about, as we go forward here, a little bit about whether you're talking about government or whether you're talking about business. I think a more important conversation is about the degree of centralization of either government or business. And so I just love this. After 1945, the fishing economy was transformed from a predominantly labor-intensive inshore household-based salt fish producing enterprise. So that's 400 years of that, into an industrialized economy dominated by vertically integrated frozen fish companies. And I'm going to ask some questions later about, you know, who do the fish belong to, and who should be allowed to own the fish? So these efficient companies needed fewer workers, and so in my lifetime, there was it was really a forced resettlement program. About 300 communities in Newfoundland were resettled, and Fogo Island was not one of them, and I'll talk about why it wasn't, because it's important to now. And I think that's the, oh yes, I love this sentence. The situation was made worse by both federal and provincial pursuit of programs of economic liberalization. That's true. Even in Canada, that happened. Okay, so that's what my forebears did. And then this came. It's so interesting, you know, for most of the history, we've had a 12-mile limit. So inside the 12-mile fishing limit, there were no quotas. Communities organized how much they were going to take. Outside of that limit, it became a 200-mile limit afterward, there was really no community that controlled how much was taken. Although I think today we have the ability to make a community of international fishing people that can make decisions, good decisions, about how much to take. We haven't done that yet. So there you go, the most beautiful fish in the world, and you can see it was brought in, it took 30 years to bring that fish with the full force of industrialization to the brink of extinction. This is what it meant for populations along the coast of Newfoundland. It was a free fall of population. This was the resettlement program that the government brought in. Very controversial, of course, but Fogo Islanders didn't go, and there's a reason they didn't go, and it had to do with an intervention in the community by the National Film Board of Canada. And this is so interesting because really there was really no reason to stay, and along comes this fellow Colin Lowe with a film board, and 27 films were made over a period of a year. And during this, it just sparked a whole conversation about what's the most important thing, and as a result of this, Fogo Islanders found a way to stay. It was really powerful, and I think it speaks a lot for the whole idea of having a good think and having somebody come from outside who sees differently than maybe you see. And so we formed a fisheries co-op, which still owns the fish plants on the island today. Started a little shipbuilding facility and a new high school. It was a very divided place, along religious lines. That changed at the same time. So that's the backdrop. So now, when I came back home in about 2004, we were in a different kind of a free fall, different fishing industry now, crab and shrimp, but similar problems. And so when I say we, I mean my brothers and I, formed this charitable foundation, and we actually do work with the Canadian government and the Newfoundland government that have both put money into this undertaking. One wonderful thing about islands is that it's very much easier to see the results of interventions, whatever they are. And so, you know, you could say this is an experiment because we haven't proved that this works yet. But I really believe that the problems that we face on Fogo Island need to be solved through business. And I think business is a wonderful tool, and it's just a question of can we use it in better ways. And so that really is what we're hoping to do. And maybe walk through it a little bit. I think there's we didn't start out to look for some overarching great solution that's robust enough to solve all of the problems of the world. We're really looking for resilience. If we can do something in our generation that makes a difference for another 50 years, that would be good for us. And so we wanted to build another leg on the economy. Obviously, we want to nurture innovation. We wanted it to be something that was of us. And I think we thought to do this through preserving ways of knowing somehow. This, of all the slides I'm going to show you, this is the one I think is most important. I look at this every day. Everybody has to answer the question, you know, what's the most important thing? Well, the most important thing to me in my work is a community. And when I think about what can we do for the community, this chart, which shows the importance of all of the different kinds of capital that affect a community, is the most important thing. And I think we tend to over-focus on economic capital at the expense of the other forms of capital. This fellow, Peter Senge's work is really interesting. I always love this chart. He questions, is this the real world? You know, where you see society and environment as wholly owned subsidiaries of the economy. And I think most people have kind of given up and think, well, that must be the way it is. You know, the almighty dollar controls everything. Peter Senge will point out it's actually not the real world. The real world has to be this way. It's the only kind of sustainable world. The question is, can we find business models that puts economy in the role it needs to be in, which is as a servant. It has been a very terrible master. And can we get it back in its place? So the things we've tried to do on the island, we started with some preservation, to preserve some things before they were lost. We started this organization called Fogo Island Arts. We have a business fund that's modeled exactly after the Grameen Bank. It's a micro-lending fund for people starting businesses on the island. We're building it in to be an economic engine, and we have a whole bunch of fish initiatives. Preservation things, there you go. That guy knows how to go find wood, knows how to make boats. We have a race now. This is some of the studios that we've built for the residency program. And that's the inn, which just opened. And in that inn, we looked for the opportunities to build culture into it. So this is a pretty typical interaction between a designer from away and some local builders and boat builders. And so if you can build a boat, you can build furniture. Actually, it was my neighbor who said this. He said, our problem is we just don't expect enough from things. And he was particularly preoccupied with chairs. And he says, you know, if you ask a chair, it would actually do a lot for you, a lot more than we ask it to do. So we talk about these things. So this is so all these objects you see have been derived in a collaboration between designers from away and local craftspeople. And this is just scenes from inside the inn. And there it is. And then the fish initiatives we have mostly to do with the cod are commercially extinct, but not ecologically extinct, and there's really good signs they're coming back. So we have a very tiny fishery now. The question is, can we catch them in better ways? Meaning ways that don't have negative impact on other species. So we have a couple of projects that have to do with that. So this is what we're doing. I think we've talked about all of this. Oh, this will give you a headache, but to give you a sense that there's an economic engine. There's the Fogo Island Arts, which is a not-for-profit organization. The idea is to generate some amount of income that stays in the community that's built at the place. And so the question becomes, I mean, who cares about Fogo Island? What's the difference if 2,395 people have to move to Gander and work at McDonald's? Who cares? Well, I care. They care.
Where's Gander?
Gander is on the mainland of Newfoundland. Yeah, it's the airport town. I think that what we're doing has the potential, if we do it right, to be a model for other places. Certainly other rural places, maybe other urban places. I think there's other ways for business to be done. I think there's other ways for people to be connected in the world. I think, why can't communities own capital? Is it right, for example, as my neighbor asks me every day, is it right for someone we don't even know, who we think lives in Florida but we're not really sure, to own the fish plants? Not on Fogo Island, but in other places. Is that something that's okay? Should we not change that? And do we continue to learn from these creatures? I mean, these creatures know things we don't know. And this knows things we don't know. And that's been the history of this island. We actually, in addition to a residency program for artists, we have a residency program for geologists, because they know lots of things we don't know too. And these are some of the leftover assets from the inshore cod fishery. So is this useless? Are these things useless? Do they contain knowledge? I think they do. And maybe some questions that we could be here for a week if we want to answer all of these. But.
Yeah, I think we need to, maybe we can leave them up there for a minute.
Okay.
So this is, it's hard to be against this, really, isn't it? In a way. It sounds good. You know?
We got to make it work.
No, but it sounds good. But you know, there's a couple of things. I mean, first, we should believe you, right? We have to believe you. That's, I mean, I'm being, for the sake of argument.
Yeah.
I mean, BP, British Petroleum, tells me its main interest is ecological, looking after the planet. It tells me that every time I open Spiegel or Stern or the New York Times magazine or something, it's a big picture of an oil company's advert saying how its primary interest is the planet, or ecology, or flowers, or dolphins, or something.
Right.
So, in a way, but this is, because I'm interested in this moment of this return. Like, did you have a, I was going to turn into like bad psychiatry. Did you have was there a crisis?
Was there a crisis? Was it?
What did capitalism do to you that made you suddenly have this?
Well, there actually was. There was a crisis of capitalism. Yeah. I mean, no. I mean, really, there were. When working in, I worked mostly first in Canada, and I worked in a private company, privately held company. And in that kind of organization, we optimized for, it was a technology company, we optimized for keeping the best we could in terms of our position in the market, in the technological marketplace. So our time horizon was quite long. I mean, at least we thought long, 10 years or something. And then we went public on the Canadian Stock Exchange in Toronto, and all of a sudden there was this quarterly earnings reporting. Then we merged with an American company and we're trading on NASDAQ. And no question, I could see things then, lived through things then that I found very frightening about speculation and all of that. I was always going home. I never lost touch with home.
But you must have known that this abstraction of this displacement of capital is the engine of modern capitalism. I mean, it's not, I know it's. Was it more? Was it that you weren't thinking about the implications of it before, or when the company sold shares in the stock market and therefore became its primary responsibility is to the shareholders instead of these other ideas you were talking about. Yeah, But you must have known that's going to happen at some point.
And that was okay. That part was actually okay. I think it's all, like everything, it's a question of speed and scale. Even being traded, we traded half the shares on the Toronto Stock Exchange. That was actually, I still felt we could be accountable to the people who work for the company and to the technology. It really became when you go out on a big American exchange at a time, I mean, this was 1999, let's say, huge amount of speculation in the system. It really became, we as a company came to survive entirely accountable to EPS and to return on capital.
What? Sorry, you're going to have to explain.
Earnings per share.
I'm finding it hard to follow.
Yeah. To earnings per share, like quarterly earnings per share.
I don't understand anything.
Return on capital of the people who are speculating on our stock.
If I buy a bit of something, I get what?
You get a share.
Yeah, and then I get more for free?
Well, you could sell it. That's the whole point. You hold on to it.
But you said this 2 for 1 or something, or earnings thing? I didn't understand.
Earnings per share.
Right. I've never heard that term before.
Yes. If you come to Fogo Island, we have a little economics class for artists. Yeah. But the point is,
I think what you're doing is a good thing to do, but slightly speeding over the bad bits, because they're bad, so you're doing what I do, which is speed over them a bit.
And so basically what was happening for me was realizing what was going on in the capital markets, and actually it got worse after that. And at the same time, at home, I always had various projects. One was a scholarship program. And in the middle of...
Who's I? You?
Me.
So you would pay people some money to go to college or something? Okay,
right,
just to be
exactly. And
these are not familiar concepts. I've never met anyone in England or anywhere in Europe that has a scholarship program where they would... Do you see what I mean? Because it's not the same culture. That maybe does exist, but I don't know. I'm just trying to get...
So I was at home we had these periodic reviews of the scholarship program, and in one of these public reviews, a woman stood up and she said, all you're doing is paying our kids to leave.
In the island?
Yes. And she said, can't you do something to make jobs? And so that led to a whole thinking about what to do. And of course, when you realize that something needs to be done, then not to do anything is doing something as well. So that took us down the path that I just described.
Right. One of the things that I think we're all experienced, and is something that tends not to... It's easier to talk about the art market and the rampant auction prices and this and that. But one of the things that's happened in the last 10 years is accelerating is the constant use of art or contemporary art as a kind of thing, as a sort of entity, as a sort of fictional domain, or as not exactly a branding, but a useful demonstration of forward thinking, right? So you get this from whether it's London Underground, using artists constantly to sort of, as a thing, seems to make sense, logical. Or Louis Vuitton, also thinking it's useful to work with artists and use them. There seems some logic here in these two choices. But in fact, it gets to the point where everywhere you turn, there's contemporary art or contemporary relatives of contemporary art, close relations, like architects and designers, have somehow been sort of, they're sort of sucked up and redeposited in various locations. How is your map and your model of it different to, say, the way a city would use an artist or one of the big brands, for example? It doesn't seem quite the same thing to me.
I don't know how we could suck them up when we put something out there that says, will you please come and live here with us for a while? And we try to facilitate that as best we can. But when they come and spend time, we don't say, we're designing a handbag, please make us, help us make the handbag better.
Nothing wrong with handbags.
Right, yes. What's that? We don't need handbags, actually. Handbags are a funny thing. The same neighbor who I was talking about earlier always says to me when I'm going away, he says, and can you find out why we only get 50 cents for a pound of fish when a handbag costs $200? He doesn't know that they cost more. But in any event, I think it's different. I don't know about these other cases, so I can't.
You must do. You must know. You must be aware of it.
How can someone suck up an artist, especially a contemporary artist? They resist everything.
Absorb, ease the breakdown of barriers between things, introduce the idea of contemporary art. It shouldn't be possible that some tough, gnarly fisher person could tolerate some artists wandering around an island like that. Why would they? What have the artists done to themselves to make themselves so to flow into these places like this? How is this even possible?
Well, they're invited and they come, and when they arrive, I think I don't know what you call it, the fishermen, but I think they see them as, they're curious about their work, of course. I think the dialogue that happens pretty naturally between them is completely innocent, right. Which is actually quite, I think, refreshing for both. For both. I mean, we do try to help them, because they're newcomers to the island, figure out who's who and where the grocery store is or whatever. But otherwise, they pretty much work independently. Right. And some prosper and do good work there, and some want to run away. You know, the isolation is a bit much for them.
But it's okay, I understand. But there are moral and ethical issues here, it seems, that it's a very specific location, right, that has a particular history of people that came primarily from Ireland and Scotland, right?
That's right. Yeah.
To come and continue, in a way, some of the work that they'd already been doing. Is that correct? The people, crofters or fishermen and small farmers, in a way, eking out a living that would go there and have a new life in Newfoundland. Is that right?
No.
The original population came from Scotland and Ireland.
Yes, not Scotland, England and Ireland.
Right, yeah. And then they continued the work they'd been doing in England and Ireland.
No, and mostly not. They became fishing. Most of them weren't fishing people. They were farming people, and they became fishing people when they came. It's a specific
community of people, right, who
Absolutely.
identify with each other and can recognize each other, in a way.
Absolutely.
Because this becomes the problem. You know, maybe you talked about this already, but this question of expanding this or getting, as you say, universal implications of this from the specific. How can you do this without ending up with a kind of nationalistic horror show, in a way? Like, the British were very good at feeling good about themselves, and they thought they'd got a good system, and everyone knew their place, and everyone had a decent relationship. The artist could talk to the person who polished your shoes, who could tip their hat at the aristocrat, and it was a good system, it worked. And if only it could have been done everywhere on Earth, it would have been wonderful. Like, it would create a better planet, you know? And we know where this leads to, so I'm going a bit ahead of myself, but this model, in a way, how does it grow, or how can it be, what bits of it can be used that don't lead to disaster, in a way, or kind of...
It's a very small island and a very small project. I just switched to a different set of questions. I think that we're not evangelical about our model. Okay. Really, all we want to do as a community, and I'm sure lots of communities feel the same, is find a way to hang on. I mean, for Fogo Islanders, I think for Newfoundlanders...
Hang on financially or
well, both. We're not going to be able to hold on and live next to the graves of the people who came before us and have some continuation of community with the people who came before us. I mean, Fogo Islanders are very deeply, deeply attached to the rocks and to the sea. It's not so much a kind of identity with a political environment.
A political environment?
I was just saying to someone, we didn't have a mayor until very recently. I mean, we've never had government, but we've had a very strong sense of community. And so the motivation for the project is just to find a way that we can have jobs, we can still know who we are, and we can continue in that kind of community with our history. And so then we're trying to do this against a backdrop of economic policies, changes in economy, social economy, that are getting ahead of us. You know, that if we're not, if we do nothing, we think, one of two things will happen. Eventually everybody will just move away and nobody will live there. Mm-hmm. And as I said, who cares? Maybe, that's one possibility. The other possibility is it'll become flattened in some way that doesn't bear much resemblance to what was there before.
Right. In the 1980s and 70s and 80s, there was a lot of discussion about the emergence of what we would call like the heritage industry, like the business of creating fake histories, living histories that were often in Britain, for example. You might go to an old mill where they would have made cloth, and you could see people acting like workers, or you could go to a farm in Austria and see people acting like peasants or something on the weekend. Isn't that what's happening here, but just with a little extra contemporary art to kind of spice it up a bit?
Yeah, nobody's really, we're not acting anything. I think we don't really have any museums, and people don't dress up in period costumes. We just want to find a little more economic stability. We want to hang on to the fishery. We want to certainly influence as best we can fisheries policy, for example, so that it isn't optimizing for return on capital for some distant capital holder, but rather perhaps optimizing for employment in the adjacent areas to the fishery. So obviously we, as a community, want to put that agenda forward and advocate for it.
Which one? Sorry.
The agenda of trying to ensure that the rights to fish and the fishing quotas stay in the ownership of communities that are actually doing the fishing.
Right.
So that's something we care about and we push for and advocate for. And at the same time, to put this other leg down through the inn and whatever activities can be associated with that, that gives people another set of jobs. Mm-hmm. But nobody's going to wear a period costume piece.
Right. They sort of look a bit like they are in a way already, but I guess it's new stuff, but the same style with the check shirt and the braces. To me, it looks like historical period clothing.
No, not. Just the way it is. Okay. Interesting, this second question is, how do we find our way in the spectrum of positional versus material goods? This goes to this guy's question about handbags and fish. You know, and one of the things we talk about, which is interesting, is the codfish look like they're coming back. Fogo Island is going to have as good a position as any community in the cod fishery in Canada. And so what should we do to get more than 50 cents a pound? So one of the things, of course, we talk about is maybe we need a brand for our codfish. So, gee, maybe we should invest some money in design a different package for it, do some advertising, do some product placement in right markets. And so then we're moving the fish from being a material good to as well being a positional good. And that makes my brain hurt to think to do that.
You're against that idea?
Well, I mean, I'd like to think there was a choice. I'd like to think that all by ourselves we're going to recognize that a wild-caught fish pulled from the water, for which there aren't that many, should be worth more than 50 cents a pound. But I haven't proved that yet.
Right, I see. So if we come back to if we try and look at this in relation to the theme of the discussion that was introduced, to me it's really clear that neoliberalism is in itself already a kind of Anglo-Saxon term. It suffers from this double problem that the constant deployment and use of it is also oppressive somehow, because it seems to come from it comes from a particular location. It comes from a particular kind of place, and there are of course different. Within these discussions, there are also different positions. There's the question of neoliberalism as a political and ideological formulation, and on the other hand, neoliberalization, which would be more of a set of procedures or enacted breakdowns of limits or desires for tariff-free zones, very similar to what happened in the middle of Europe in the middle of the 19th century, where you had the breakdown of tolls and tariffs and so on. It occurs to me that maybe what the artists that will come to the island and maybe some of the old fishing families have in common is they don't really like being told what to do very much, in a way. Is that correct? Should we be looking away from these economic and social terminologies and looking towards human psychology, or ways that people are actually, the way they behave, the way they literally resist or behave in relation to power?
Actually, that's very observant, given that you haven't been there, because exactly
I've met some fishermen in my time.
Yeah,
and I've tried to tell fishermen what to do, and they don't like it.
No, they really don't like it.
Could you move your boat?
Yeah.
Oi,
no.
Could you move your boat, please?
Yeah, that's very true. People Can I tell you a small Canadian joke which has to do with neoliberalism? Why did the Canadian cross the road? To get to the middle. Because the middle is a really good place. Canadians are really good at finding balance. Newfoundlanders are a bit different, and so I would say that most Newfoundlanders, especially the outport ones, would self-identify as sociable anarchists, which is why we haven't had much need of government. And I think for the fishermen that are there on the island now, we still have a pretty active fishery. They can't reconcile this idea of government, but they can even less reconcile the idea of big companies that own fishing quotas. Mm-hmm. So I think that gives them things to talk about.
Maybe it's important to try and open up the discussion a bit, and whether or not
wicked problems.
Yeah. We want to talk about wicked problems?
No, just that. Yes, I think we're in a wicked problem. Yeah, that's.
But mainly, I'm not sure how much value there is in directing specific questions towards us, but maybe there are specific comments on this complicated relationship between isolated community models that seem to have a good potential, like this one over here, these generalizing terms about the way it is and the way we're all sucked into a certain totalizing system, and these various kind of modes of resistance, stubbornness, and human interaction.
What I see in the last years is a combination of an interest in a community that is combined with the differentiation of knowledges, this special interest in difference of knowledges. And my question would be whether this interest in this specific difference of knowledges doesn't substitute an interest in other conflict areas or differences, for example, racism or gender issues. But maybe you don't have problems with racism and gender issues. So.
Meaning that you're saying that a focus on certain differences tends to ignore these bigger questions?
Somehow, maybe not ignoring, but somehow substituting it in the discussions. I saw it in the last Documenta, for example. There was such a euphoria in knowledges, to bringing together different kind of knowledges of professionals that are not from the art scene and bringing them into them, and to be so happy that everybody can talk to each other and everybody will be happy to form a new community on this registering of different types of knowledges. And
yes, it does seem to assume that there is a kind of, everyone has equal access to participating in the discussion, which of course was the great, one of the problems with a lot of participatory art in the 90s and the early 2000s, that often it assumed that there was an potential equal level of participation, which of course isn't the case generally. But you had did you have any thoughts on this issue?
Yeah,
that maybe in a way it's not one that you've done deliberately or because you're evil or even I've done it deliberately, but somehow there are still some big political questions that need to be dealt with that in this case they can't be addressed here. The model's too small, or it's got too many exceptions. There's too much specificity and too much difference here, and this is why in New York City in the last week, every night, certain people are getting beaten up every night in New York City and there's nothing we can do about this island or making a participatory project in wherever that can do anything about this kind of question. I mean, I'm being a bit extreme in my anecdote, but I'm just saying.
No, I mean, it is a very specific place, and and the scale of it is such that probably in any given year, maybe 20 artists might come to the island and spend time. We haven't designed anything specific that tries to be broad-based. It's a very open kind of almost happy accident somehow who ends up coming and.
Right. Okay. I think I take it as also as a statement. I don't know if there's any more contributions.
Actually, sorry.
Are there any more questions?
This one at the front here.
Thank you. There have been listed quite a few questions before, which seem familiar to me from the literature of ecological economics. And all these questions or the solutions which might be appropriate for these questions, no, the previous page, yeah, no, that's the page, yeah. And they're difficult to overcome because it's a matter of policy and of consciousness of consumers. And so from that point of view, what's wrong about taking a brand for, as you mentioned before, but obviously you're not very fond of this idea, in order to promote a valuable product from your region, because a brand is just a symbol which is able to convey information to the consumer which he otherwise wouldn't get.
Right, so you're saying that the fact that the word brand has become, it's a term that educated, sophisticated people are supposed to look down upon as a term, right? We would think. It makes me angry. If someone uses it in relation to me, it gets the hair on the back of my neck. I get fight or flight feelings. I've had it. But the point is that you're saying that why not do it? Because all you're doing, it's like maybe we said earlier, like champagne or some eco-bio wine in Austria, that it's just showing that you're special and it's from somewhere special. Maybe it's not such a problem.
Yeah, and maybe there's no, really the reason I don't do it easily is it costs money. It costs a lot of money that we could spend on other things on the island. And I don't know, it's a little bit like we have to join the game, right? Which I guess we do. Maybe we already have. And maybe that's the cost of the price of being there. Maybe there's a place. Yeah, I want to come. It's sort of about. I want to come to your question and to the other person's question. You know, there's this amazing book which I highly recommend called The Price of Fish, and they talk about to tackle these problems we need to look at choice and how people make choices, and of course economics, and of course systems, and of course evolution and innovation, and how all of these things come together. And I think as Fogo Islanders, as 2,395 people who want to hang on, we need to be very cognizant of all of that. And if we're going to participate, maybe, no doubt, you will be seeing Fogo Island branded fish in the market. I mean, another thing, talk about systems, there's something called the Marine Stewardship Council, which certifies fish as having been sustainably caught. That's something that Fogo Islands made the decision to join as well. And that's another way of signaling that our fish is different. So, but I want to just, this idea of community is really important to I think. We happen, Fogo Islands is a community that's in a specific place, but the world of people who fish, that's another community that I think we need to be better at growing.
It makes me nervous though.
To be a community?
Yeah, I don't want to be in a community. It makes me think of people knowing what you're doing.
Oh, everybody knows what you're doing.
That's suffocating. I mean, I have an Irish background, but I was brought up in London, but the first time I used to go to Ireland, I was really shocked that in the small guest house, the man late at night would always be in the garden. I couldn't work out, why is he in the garden at night like this? What's he doing? Why does he do this?
Tending his potatoes.
No, he was waiting for me to come back because he was worried. Because he wanted to know what I'd been doing.
Well,
and he lived in a community of people that did this kind of thing, and it was a community. And you know what? When things go wrong, when things go to shit in Paris or anywhere else, you have someone from the community, right, who comes to talk to you about why there's a problem with the police or something, you know. And so there's, in a way, it's like this community is the sort of the answer and the problem at the same time is, to me, always complicated. I mean, but you're saying that there might be something quite unique about a particular Canadian, this thing about finding the middle bit.
Mm-hmm.
So do we need a more Canadian sort of, it's a hard thing. As a Canadian, you can't answer the question, because it's not a Canadian way, but should there be more of an understanding of a Canadian model in the same way that when I was a kid we used to talk about a Scandinavian model, for example, of social democracy, of welfare, of different things? Should there be more talk about a Canadian model or an island model or a region model?
Yeah, I would say yes, that the Canadian model has a lot of good things about it that is worth knowing. I think how this community of Fogo Island and others like it function, there's a huge amount to know. I mean, imagine 400 years we didn't have a government, didn't need one. And there's no question, your reaction to, oh, everybody's going to know what I'm doing, that's true. That's the other side of it. And I would argue that many of the problems we have in the financial system have to do with anonymity, too much anonymity. And, you know, when the salt fish trade was on the go, the merchant who sold the fish, we sold to, and then he sold on to Spain generally, he lived in the community. And so this negotiation that happened over what should the price of fish be this year was done with him. And we always found an answer that was acceptable to all, because ultimately he wasn't living in a distant place, and he had to live and be part of the community. And I think good outcomes arrive when people have to live in community with each other, as painful as it sometimes is.
Okay.
So that's working, yeah. It's for Liam specifically. Just wondering, you seem to be making some assumptions that the project that Zita's involved in is commodifying some kind of authenticity. I think you're saying something about that.
Wondering, I was curious. Curious, sorry.
So I'm just wondering, I mean, maybe no such authenticity exists, and this idea itself is outmoded. Maybe you could say something about that.
Right. Well, it's not so much authenticity, it's just that the dilemma of the subject under discussion cannot be, neither of us are in a position to address it, in a way. So the basic problem of facing neoliberalism cannot be faced by either what Zita's doing or what I'm doing, in a way. But you can say it's literally doing it, it's literally in the face of it, like it's facing it, but not confronting or having a new model. Whether it comes down to this idea of commodifying authenticity, I'm not so sure, but I have just finished writing a text about this question, because I do think it's a bigger question and a bigger problem than we might think. And yeah, I don't know exactly what to say about this. I mean, I think it's clearly the commodification of authenticity is a very dynamic business, and it's the nature of Whole Foods supermarkets in America, or a lot of the eco and bio obsession of upper middle class people and educated people in Austria. It's all part of this branding of authenticity, and for me it's potentially a problem, or I find it as difficult and problematic as global financial exchange or something. I don't see these things as necessarily separated. They are all worthy of being examined or thought about, you know?
Yeah, but I'm saying there is no authenticity, so it's not being commodified.
Yeah, but you know, I'm not French, I'm not a French post-structuralist theorist. I know what you mean. I'm
just saying it's common sense that it doesn't exist.
Yes, there are true histories, there are actual things happening, you can tell people where things came from. Yeah.
Yeah, it is what it is.
But I have a question to Zita. Why do you think branding fish the idea of branding fish is so difficult or wrong when you already branded contemporary architecture to the island?
Well, I think that I don't even think about the architecture as a brand. I think the architecture that is there evolved out of an honest conversation around where we're going to build an inn, what form is it going to take, and And the options seemed to be, okay, we can copy the vernacular of the island and just make more little wooden houses, or we could do something, and you have to keep in mind the architect is from the region, or we can do something that would be, if our ancestors were building something now, what would they build? So we didn't go about it with the deliberate thing to say, okay, let's build something that is going to be a brand. I don't know, I think a brand is something that you almost have to arrive at. There's something, you know, by doing it. And it's the advertising parts of it that make me uncomfortable, I guess. Maybe I'm just so naive that I think if we keep at this long enough, fish will just go up in price and we won't have to do it. But probably not. And I don't want to get into a conversation with the fishermen about what the brand should be. That will be, they'll be so cantankerous, they'll never agree on anything anyway.
There's one more question.
I have a question here, and that would be, how do you relate to counter-capitalist practice in the rest of the world? For me, it sounds a bit secluded, and also a kind of coming from a local position, and also it was very obvious that you always said we, as in the dichotomy to you and them, and it had a certain nationalistic approach too, because the Canadians, we, and things like that. And also, for example, a question would be, how would you relate to Canadian fishers and their economic crisis, to say how to address global capitalism in terms of, like, do you have a model of a transnational moment of solidarity, or how do you relate to other counter-neoliberal or counter-capitalist practice?
Well, we started, you know, where we started in that place, and I think as we've been at this project now for about 5 years, and I think it's a little bit what's there. I think we do need to build and reach out to a community of other rural places, especially other fishing places, wherever they are, to try and find a way to work on these problems together and to learn from each other. But we really didn't set out to come up with a robust, overarching solution as a response for fishing people or rural people or against neoliberalism or capitalism. We really just set out to find a way to further the resilience of this particular community. And as we got into it, you realize, wow, the context, I mean, I came out of a fiber optics industry. I knew nothing about the fishing industry and its structure. I know a whole lot more now. I don't know where we go next with what we've learned, but I would certainly be interested in what other communities are doing. I mean, every industry is so specific that you've got to know the details of it to navigate through it, I think. I don't know if that answers your question, though.
The question is, you are connected, so the world is globalized, so what would be the strategies on a long term? It's kind of course, I understand it's protective, it's a very protective measure, but in that sense it's also how to be one step ahead. So what would be a long-term strategy in terms of how to divide, for example, fishing space, but also together with other communities, for example, not with the Canadian government. Right. I'm not speaking about nationalist measures, but so there are a lot of communities and they have to share space, they all have the same interests. So there must be some kind of more long-term perspective on that, besides of a more protective and maybe also defensive way of seeing your community.
Yeah, I think when we started the project, it was the first place that we went to have conversations was to Norway, because they have a huge number of fishing communities that have similar kinds of challenges. And I think out of that conversation came a realization of what we learned from those people, that if the community can't have some kind of proprietary access to the fish in the water that's adjacent to the community, then the community will simply not exist. So I think for a fishing community, by definition, you need to be defensive. You need to play these. I mean, if we're not going to look after the fish, who's going to look after the fish? And if we don't have a proprietary access to that resource, the reason for the community stops existing. We may as well all just move away. So there's no way to hang on to a fishing community without being defensive. It's a necessity. But I can absolutely see a community of fishing communities that would advocate for the same thing. And if that happens, then I think that's an important part of the journey to get away from the amount of illegal fishing that goes on now. I mean, the tragedy of the commons plays out no better than in the fishery.
Okay, we are running a bit late, but there is one more comment.
Thanks. It's just a little comment. Also, what goes through my head in terms of your example of Fogo Island and talking about neoliberalism, which you can obviously expand this Fogo Island sort of idea into other issues, such as the Olympics or regeneration in London with the Olympics already happened, it will happen in Rio, or a nation branding, and even Austria at the moment, the ministry does a new nation branding. So we could look at the Austrians as such, and we need more creatives because you can pimp a country with artists, and you need the special ingredients in order to sort of regenerate it, not only after post-fishing, but let's say after post-industrialism, so people they don't know what to work now, they don't know what to do, they need new products, and da-da-da-da-da-da. So I think this Fogo Island is not a unique one, just to finish. It stays, unfortunately, as a good example or bad example in the world we live in, and what you have to do in order to overcome post-industrial difficulties.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll take that as a comment, right, yes, rather than a question.
Yeah, exactly, it's a comment. Okay, there's one more, and this is really the last.
I come from Norway, and my sister living up in the north, just the kind of community you showed us, a little bit like that. And they also do agriculture and Arctic agriculture. And my brother-in-law, they are connecting all over Europe just for these kinds. This is very, like fishing, very special kind of doing things. And they also take back their agriculture because they were taken by the industrial agriculture. And now they take their own agriculture back again. So they take up the old traditions, which was knowledge, which you're talking about, taking back the knowledge into the community and then about branding, I think they are branding, but I also thought you're also a bit critical about branding because it's changing our relationship between each other because we are branding each other too. It's like in such a community, these brandings are still not so strong, which we have in Central Europe, for instance, or something.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And it reminds me what you said of a little bit of Willem. I don't know if Willem's still here in his talk about one of the pieces had the other birds coming to take back their feathers from the raven. It sounds a bit like that.
Zita Cobb and Liam Gillick, thank you very much.